Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. It's that time of year again when the budget cap becomes deeply in the spotlight, and Fred Vasseur, team principal at Ferrari, says that this year if there is any breaches, it needs to be punished far more severely than we saw last time around, saying Red Bull's penalty they got last year for breaching the 2021 cost cap is an absolute joke, and this time if they breach it again or anybody else does, the punishment needs to be far more severe. Very much intrigued to your perspective in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. First of all, thought this is kind of interesting. The trophy that was broken by Lando Norris of Max Verstappen's at the Hungarian Grand Prix is getting remanufactured. And it's kind of, well, I don't know, there's always a silver lining, isn't there, right? And it's kind of given more attention to the incredible production practices and the craftsmanship that goes into creating these porcelain, well, trophies, I suppose. But they actually come up with a statement which is almost, it's like half directed at Lando Norris. Everyone is always welcome to visit the manufacturer's visitor center to learn about the extremely high level of craftsmanship in hand painting and porcelain making that the process of creating value inherent. So basically saying, look, Lando, if you want to come and visit and see what it took to break the trophy that you broke, then feel free to do exactly that. Couple of updates on the driver market as well. There's rumors that, Sauber, right? Alfa Romeo Sauber, Teo Pourchaire has been in Formula 2 for a couple of years now, and he's looking pretty decent to maybe win the title this year. And to be honest, I think that he probably needs to, but he is in the conversation to replace Zhou Guanyu next season. But there were rumours a couple of weeks ago now that Zhou is on the verge of signing a new deal, and frankly, I think Zhou's pretty good. He's had a solid season. He's not far off the pace at all of Bottas, so I don't really see why they would change that necessarily unless they're thinking longer term Audi Sauber, the 2026 project. And this is the question, right? If Pourchaire does stay around until 2025, Audi might have a say at that point, and therefore he might not get the chance that he wants. Speaking of drivers in that position, George Russell is still the last driver that isn't a Red Bull driver to win a race in Brazil last season, won the sprint there as well. Who's going to be the next to do this? You've got to think, as it stands, Hamilton feels like the most likely if Mercedes actually put things together on the weekends, and obviously it would take some sort of collapse on Red Bull to allow anyone else to actually win. And okay, Alonso, maybe if the Aston Martin turns it around, Leclerc is definitely, well, obviously you can't count out Russell, but those are the drivers that I would look at. What I'm kind of more interested to wonder though is who's the next driver that's going to win a race as their maiden Grand Prix victory, because most of the drivers at the front end of the grid that are winning races now or have done in the recent past, especially Russell for example, they've got that first win now. So the candidates really are probably, you've got Piastri and Norris, right, of McLaren. Those are the obvious candidates with the way the season currently is, and then I guess Stroll of Aston Martin would be the next and most likely, you would think, given the way the grid is currently looking. Sainz won his first Grand Prix last year, of course, in Silverstone, and Aston Martin have upgrades to bring. The rumour is from Mike Crack that they will bring upgrades to the Dutch Grand Prix. The discussion was that Aston Martin's Canada upgrades actually took them a step back, and they don't really understand, well, they basically brought too much downforce to the car, and this is apparently a trap that every team but Red Bull has fallen into, that it's not always about the downforce, it's about the suspension and the ride height and these other factors. So Aston Martin have actually now had to take a step back somewhat, and they're bringing upgrades to correct their earlier errors, and, well, he does reckon that they could be the second fastest car after the summer break. So we'll see if Aston Martin can be back, because if they can, then maybe Alonso's still in with a chance of getting that victory number 33 sometime this season. And maybe Stroll fancies his chances as well, but I thought this is an interesting statement where Stroll says, yeah, generally Fernando's just been a bit faster than me here, so I have to figure out how to go faster. Simple. That's kind of what we're here to do at the end of the day. Now, Aston Martin, it's got to be said, are in the conversation for maybe having broken the cost cap from last season in 2022. And it makes sense they're in this discussion just because of all the progress they made over the winter. There's an argument to say that they spent too much money last year. They breached it procedurally back in 2021 at the first year that it was actually managed, and the other team that breached it that year of course was Red Bull, the catering, whatever you guys want to say. But look, if you're spending 400k or whatever on catering, then that's 400k that other teams, other teams have to buy catering as well, and therefore that's money that could have gone elsewhere. Hamilton was like, oh, it's only 250k for a new front wing, etc, etc. Most teams generally believe, and you can see why, that Red Bull got off very lightly with that penalty, and we can see the usual car bias in the driver of the day winners. Okay, there's obviously valid winners here as well, but, there's 3 for Verstappen, 3 for Perez, for example, so far this season. You always kind of get something like that. And looking at the season, this is Red Bull compared to Ferrari, the current current couple of seasons. These are the championship leaders, or actually the eventual champion of the season from the constructors side, compared to Ferrari over the last several years, and they've gone back and forth. They were quite close in 2017, 2018, then they had a few tough years, bounced back in 2022 after 12 races, though they were still behind, largely due to reliability, and then 2023 again has been a shambles. But look how far Red Bull are ahead. I mean, you look at this is after 12 races, point standings. Mercedes in this dominant period, 440, maybe 430 points or something. Red Bull this season, 500 already, 500 plus after just 12 races of the season. And this is why Vasseur and others are saying that the penalty they got from their 2021 breach that has arguably helped them into 2022 with that extra development resource, and therefore going forward as well into the current season and even beyond, is an absolute joke. He says such a penalty should be much heavier. The deduction of 10% wind tunnel testing time, taking Red Bull from 70% of the allocation, you get 70% by being first in the championship, down to 63%, is a big joke. They've already done most of the work by then, he says. So Vasseur kind of explained the whole saga from his perspective. He reckons that 5% violation window is not small, it is big, because it was considered a minor breach, 5%. But 5% is actually an awful lot, and I don't really know why they described it like this. Red Bull didn't go over by that much. There's a debate whether they went over by 0.4%, whether they went over by 1.5%, depends on the intricacies of the tax rebate, something like that anyway. But as he describes, let's say 135 million budget, 80 million already goes to your personnel, 20 million to race costs, materials, brakes, etc. Then making 4 chassis at the beginning costs about 20 million, so that leaves you roughly 10 million to develop. So you imagine, if you were to add an extra 5 million theoretically to your development budget, you'd bump that up by 50%. So that's kind of the point that he's making, that any extra money that is spent over the cap should really be compared to this roughly $10 million development budget compared to elsewhere. Now, other team bosses might disagree with this analysis, but this kind of gets the point across. So this was the judgment here on the difference. So I think, they were 1.4 million over, but then with various other accounting stuff, they were like 0.4% in breach. That's what Red Bull say. The FEA say differently, but whatever. They kind of got away with it in some respect, and we've kind of seen that over the last season, right? You wouldn't know that Red Bull were undergoing this supposedly draconian penalty, according to Christian Horner, and I think most people would say that the penalty hasn't really done anything. And I think, people would also say that, maybe it's costing them a 10th or something in development they could have done, and sure, but then you could also argue that if they spent extra money early on, it's helped them develop their car further. Frankly, they've got Adrian Newey and a great development team and Max Verstappen in a ground effect era. They're probably going to win everything anyway, but still, people expected it to make some difference, and as yet it hasn't really done so. And this is the point that Vasseur's making, that, well, if you're only going to get a small fine of $7 million or something, and that's a fine that wasn't taken out of the cap, of course, that was just a fine they had to pay. It wasn't like their cap went down 7 million year on year, and then in addition, they got that 10% reduction in testing that, Vasseur describes as a big joke. A penalty like last year really isn't severe. If it should be necessary again, the penalty should be much heavier. You have to keep in mind that a technical advantage will translate into a sporting advantage. So his point is that absolutely any and all breach should be penalised by a sporting penalty, i.e. points reductions. Therefore, the penalty should be sporting and not a fine. In soccer, if you use your hand, it's a penalty. They don't give you a non-sporting penalty. It's kind of an interesting one. Not sure it quite checks out, but still, interested in your thoughts on that in the comments below. The deduction of 10% of wind tunnel is a big joke. They've already done most of the work by then, which is pretty true, right? I mean, you could argue that there's some degree of diminishing returns, where your first 90% of your wind tunnel allocation, that's where you achieve 99% of your returns, and the final 10% is just additional ideas that is giving you maybe an extra 1% performance, but nothing major. Maybe that's the point that Vasseur's trying to get across here, and he might be right on the money with that. So I guess the question is, what happens if another team breaches going forwards? Because if there is another cost cap breach, what will the FIA do this time? I think Stefano Domenicali's been quite clear, and the FIA have been quite clear that it will be more severe this time. Any breach will be punished more severely, and if Red Bull were to do it again, who knows what happens there. But the thing is, right, that you don't know. Let's say Red Bull have breached again. I don't think they have, but let's say they did for 2022 season, and we're going to find that out in, I thought, probably about now. Maybe in a couple of weeks we'll have a better idea which teams have been, in breach potentially, or who have complied with the numbers. Then let's say Red Bull get like a 20% or 10% reduction in their points totals for a sporting breach. you know, it might not make any difference, right? Verstappen still wins the title, Red Bull still win the title, and maybe that's fine if, you know, they breached, but yet they still did a better job, so even with the penalty, they were still the best team. I don't know, it's an interesting one to debate, but if a team is considered to have been cheating and then wins, you know, it leaves a massively sour taste in the mouth of pretty much everybody. Now, we don't know if they've done that, and the rumour was that Aston Martin might well have done. The current understanding was, a few weeks ago now, we're talking kind of end of July, the discussion was all about the teams that had breached it in 2022, and the rumour was that Aston Martin quite well might be in breach of it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they are, and the other two teams that were in question were Red Bull and Mercedes, and the theory was that, like, one of those two had breached, and they said at the time that it was actually more likely to be Mercedes. But, you know, the accountants, their trickery, the audits, all this stuff, it's taking clearly longer than probably they expected to get an answer to this. And that's the funny thing, that this year it was meant to be, all right, we're going to get the cost cap stuff decided way earlier, we're going to figure it out way sooner than last year, all the drama in Singapore and Japan, but it turns out we might be in Singapore and Japan again by the time it gets resolved this time around, despite the fact that it is meant to be quicker. So, at the end of the day, is anybody going to be able to stop Red Bull? It seems unlikely. Is Vasseur right that a penalty was a bit of a joke? I would say probably yes, but the question is that going into next season, what are they going to do instead? Is it going to be a 50% reduction in testing time if somebody goes over? Is it going to be, you know, the penalty comes out of the cost cap instead? Or is it just going to be a massive sporting reduction to the points totals of whatever team breached? I don't know. We'll have to see over time, but Vasseur and others have been very clear they want way more punishment if anything happens going forwards. Even, of course, if that is retroactive punishment on teams from previous seasons, in a similar way to what Felipe Massa has just tried to do. We know this has been a talking point for a couple of months now, that he's trying to get officially the 2008 world title. I don't think he's really going to be able to achieve this. He might get some sort of payouts, right? Some sort of, you know, lost revenue or bonuses. The theory is that because Crashgate happened Singapore 2008, at the time it was understood by the Formula One management team that Bernie Eccleston and co, that there was probably foul play from Renault, but yet they didn't really want it to become a big deal, so they kind of wiped it over, and if that race hadn't have counted, then Massa would have won the title, not Hamilton. So this is why Massa wants the title to be his. Whether he's going to be able to achieve that, I think it's unlikely for various reasons, but still, the lawyers are out in force, and maybe he can recover some lost revenue or bonuses or something like that over time, but that's going to be a big story to keep up with. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.